We can do it. Yes, we can. We can change things throughout the land, but we all must lend a hand. We can do it. Oh, yes, we can.
I'm Devon Hildreth, and I'm here with Joseph Wronka, professor of social work, who has been teaching human rights and social justice courses for approximately 20 years at Springfield College. He is also a Fulbright Scholar in the discipline of social work with specialties in social justice and poverty, and subspecialties in human rights psychology and phenomenology, and recently returned from Pakistan and Austria as a Fulbright Scholar. Joe, how is it relevant to today's world?
Undergirding everything is the notion of human rights, and the notion that we have to have what's called a human rights culture. That is a lived awareness of human rights principles, not just in our mind, but in our heart, and dragged into our everyday life. I'm sure your viewers, and I know you know about this, they know about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which the Americans were leaders. Eleanor Roosevelt was the chairperson of the drafting committee. And that's like the major human rights document. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, in the first article, emphasizes human dignity. Okay? Mm-hmm. The second article, it emphasizes the right not to be discriminated against, whether you're black or white or a woman or what have you. Therefore, it calls us to a way of life. Having human rights culture is a way of life. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying I do it all right all the time, but it's something we have to practice. Mm-hmm. So we have to see people as having dignity. We have to relate to people with dignity all the time. It's something that I work on when I get a marketing call at 6 o'clock in the evening when I'm having dinner with friends, okay? I know they probably don't like their jobs, but you still have to treat people with dignity. But treating people with dignity, especially as related to social policy, which is related, is pretty heavy duty. You shouldn't see people as charity cases, for example. They are not charity cases. Because they might have a disability or they're poor. They're not charity cases. They have dignity. And the question is how we could constantly tune into that with everybody. Okay, that's dignity. Now I mentioned the second article. The second article says people shouldn't be discriminated against. That's also a way of life. We need to see people as possibilities rather than actualities. So if they're poor, and I don't know, when I was a kid, I used to stop at a light in the Bowery, and there was I think they called him a squeegee person or something. They would clean the windshield wipers. Our knee-jerk reaction is, well, they're the scum of the earth, they're homeless, but they aren't. I mean, bad things happen to good people. They have viewpoints, they have ideas, and their viewpoints and their ideas need to be incorporated into the policy debates. So we need to see everyone as having a viewpoint, everyone as having dignity, and not seeing them in the context of our own stereotypical ways. And it's not just people that are poor. I don't know, it's also men. Male bashing is hot. Sells newspapers, sells movies. Mm-hmm. We shouldn't see men as whatever macho jerks or something. Or we shouldn't see women as only nurturers. Mm-hmm. They could also be CEOs. And I just came back from Pakistan, and great people over there. Our Muslim brothers and sisters are great. I mean, but we have a tendency maybe to see Muslims, or Trump does at least, as, I don't know, terrorist or something, but they're not. So we have to break through the stereotypes. So to do that is not easy. Not only does it mean we shouldn't see people as charity cases, but we should just see people as people. Mm-hmm. That might sound really strange, but I will tell you, In the disability field, it's sort of like Helen Keller, or we think of people that might be quadriplegic. We sort of look at them as, gee, you're such a Superman. How did you ever overcome this and develop this attitude? Mm-hmm. Even seeing person as a superhero, there's something weird about that. They're just human beings trying to live the best they can. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which pretty much was molded after Franklin Roosevelt's Four Freedoms, consists of three other crucial notions. The two other crucial notions are dignity and non-discrimination. Now, the three other crucial notions, the first one is civil and political rights, that people have rights to freedom of speech and freedom of expression. That's fine. So when we live human rights, we have to also listen to people. We have to give them that right. Okay, so that's part of living human rights. Okay. The fourth crucial notion has to do with what's known as economic, social, and cultural rights. And they have to do with rights to health care, rights to shelter, rights to employment, rights to rest and leisure. These are the things that we have to do also. Try to change the social structures in such that the social structures are able to give people jobs. And I'm not talking, selling light bulbs at Walmart. I mean, I'm thinking nothing against people that do that, or working at McDonald's. I mean, that's what you got to do these days. But I'm talking about jobs that are meaningful. The American delegation to the United Nations, when the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was being formed, they asked Eleanor Roosevelt, well, what is your definition of the right to work? And she said the right to work means that the work must be socially useful, it must contribute to the development of the human personality, and it must increase your purchasing power. So it must be reasonable wages. Now this is the American delegation. If we're really into human rights, what I teach people, I can't really teach this stuff. They have to figure it out for themselves. I tell my students, if you disagree with me, and I give you an F, I want you to sue me because, that's the way it is. I just sort of lay it out there, and they can decide for themselves. Most students I teach social work, so the sort of compassionate types, so they like it. But there are a number that think it's just too idealistic. It's too pie in the sky. I mean, they've been socialized into this. I mean, when I studied, Karl Marx. Will the viewers still listen to me if I quote Marx? But Marx said, from each according to his ability, to each according to his need. But in the history books, he was in the chapter that said utopian thinker. So I was socialized into thinking this stuff is just a bunch of academic nonsense and nobody can do it. And I got a lot of students that still kind of think that. What I'm trying to say is that if we live human rights, we also have to change the social structures that give people their human rights as well. So we have to change the social structures to make it so everyone could have a meaningful job, as I just defined. Okay? So that means adding a right to employment on the U.S. Constitution. There's always movements to do that, but they sort of peter away, But these are the things we have to do. So that's a fourth crucial notion. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights has a fifth crucial notion that we need to live. St. John Paul II said that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights should be lived in letter and in spirit. Okay? So the fifth crucial notion of the Declaration says that everyone has a right to a socially just order. Basically what it speaks about is solidarity rights. And what does solidarity rights mean? That I have a right so that my government cooperates with other governments. So we're not going to be able to clean up the Mediterranean if just Italy does its thing. Italy has to do it with France or what have you. We're not just going to do away with climate change if only the United States and China do their thing, though they're responsible for a large share, if not the largest share, just two countries. Everybody's got to do it. But what I teach my students is we as human rights activists, or whatever you want to call it, need to develop social actions to have governments cooperate with each other. And that's in the Declaration. That stuff is pretty profound when you think about it. What it means is the poor countries of the world have the right to the wealth of the rich nations. I just wrote a little piece in the Springfield Republican on that. Remember all those debates about the Confederate flag?
Mm-hmm.
So I wrote a piece and I said, to hell with the Confederate flag. Take down all flags. We have one world, citizenship and everything. So the comments were amazing. I'm not fit to teach our children. First of all, I don't teach children. Most of my students are in their 30s, 40s, 50s, you know, and we have great discussions. One even said something like I should be bombed or something. I don't know what the hell he said. But the whole notion of world citizenship that's in the Declaration is extremely profound. Extremely. And I just got back from Europe, you know, at the Human Rights Conference I was telling you in Amsterdam. Every time I talk to my European compatriots, it is a real trip and a half. Do your viewers know what trip and a half means? It's just really fun. I mean, I tell them we say the Pledge of Allegiance in the morning, or everybody, our students, so they go, to what? What are you, for real? So yeah, they put the flag up and everybody goes, I pledge allegiance. They say, oh my, that's unheard of in Europe. That is unheard of. The only time they have flags is when there's soccer games. It's like a moral equivalent of war, you know what I mean? You know, it's just sort of a nice substitute. In Europe, there's sort of a movement towards world citizenship. I would say more than half of Europeans know about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and they know how important it is to be lived in letter and spirit. The United States, I was reading just a few years ago that 10% of Americans knew about it. But the point is we need to know the document, we need to live the document, and we need to do things with the document that could make the world a better place. So I just mentioned a few things about how to live it: dignity, non-discrimination, and changing the social structures so that they're more in accordance with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And by the way, I just want to add that human rights are interdependent and indivisible. You cannot talk about freedom of speech without also talking about, I don't know, class issues. Because basically, when it comes to freedom of speech, it's generally the voices of the rich that are always heard. Even the United States said to the UN at one point that having money is a form of freedom of speech. And the UN got on their case. They said, come on, you've got to give voice to everybody. And, you know, the United States says, okay, thank you for telling us that. We'll do what we can. But the point is that freedom of speech, the third crucial notion, it's related to the fourth notion, economic and social rights, you know, rights to job, because you have to have money. And also the fifth notion on solidarity rights, okay? It's kind of complicated, but I just want you to, I think that students, and we all need to keep this in mind about how rights are interdependent. For example, about 20 years ago, Donald Trump, after the Central Park case where a white jogger got allegedly raped by 5 black teenagers, after that, and they've since been found innocent, Donald Trump took out a whole ad in the New York Times saying that they should reinstate the death penalty. And I'm thinking, well, that's interesting. It's nice to hear his viewpoint. How come, because he's got money, so you could only hear his viewpoint. You have to have a way to get the viewpoints of the squeegee people, like I told you, you know, and the poor. You have to put them into policy debates. Forget about the poor. Talk about children. Like I say in my classes, how many kids are on social welfare? There's millions. Have you ever seen one study that asks children their viewpoints about how their parents should be treated and how they can get out of poverty? Children. Children have viewpoints, right? You have kids, they have viewpoints. I know of maybe 2 studies. The Children's Defense Fund had a little newspaper called Voices of Children. They asked them. There's a group I work with at the UN called the International Fourth World Movement. They would talk to children in extreme poverty, and they would ask them. And they would say, whatever you do, stop sending these stupid trucks to our neighborhoods, giving out these Suchard chocolates. You make us feel like dogs. Give my parents the means to raise me. Duh. So they need jobs, you know what I mean? So out of the mouths of what, 9-year-olds? I mean, they're not stupid. You were 9 years old once. They're pretty bright. So this Universal Declaration stuff is very, very powerful. It can be a way to have socially just policies and to get people really, really moving. I believe it was Victor Hugo who said, "There's nothing more powerful than ideas. Time has come." So human rights is very, very powerful. In 2016, as of tomorrow, no government would dare say they're against human rights. That's why it's powerful. That's why the Declaration is powerful. They asked Eleanor Roosevelt, "Would you say the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is dangerous to governments?" And she said, "Yes, oh yes." Lady was wild. As we all know, what happened in the 30s, Hitler was sort of doing his thing, and they had concentration camps, and on behalf of our government, Franklin Roosevelt, he called a meeting in Evian, France, to stop the abuses of Hitler. And all the countries there basically told Hitler, "You're nuts," etc. And Hitler said, "Mind your own business." In the United States, how many Native Americans did you kill now? And don't you have public lynchings? And they looked at some of these European countries. France, I mean, don't you have torture in Algeria? And the Soviets had their own gulag. So it just ended. He kept on going and going. They met again in Bermuda. I think it was 5 years later or something. And it was a failure, basically because no government wanted to bring attention to their own abuses. So Hitler said, "Don't be a bunch of hypocrites," and they didn't want to bring attention to their abuses. But that was, close to 70 years now. Since then, people won't stand for it. What goes on anywhere in the world is everybody's business. Again, I represent social work, the International Association of Schools of Social Work at the UN. God, I just love going there. The stuff I hear, it just blows my mind. All of these governments get up there. They're not really called to the carpet or called to the floor. People say, look, what's so bad about gay and lesbian marriages? What do you have against them? So a country, Israel said, well, we find it important and we're trying to move in that direction. Other countries too. They bring that up, France, So this sort of what goes on in other countries now is everybody's business. And nobody will just let it slide. And then, of course, I could tell you stories about the UN effect. It's in my book. See, my book's coming out in a second edition. And I talk about my experiences there, human rights and social justice. This is my first book. It was my dissertation. I did it at Brandeis. Thankfully, I had a advisor. He was chair of the American Socialist Party, David Gale, co-chair. A nice guy. He didn't have horns. He didn't have a Marxist kind of beard. Just a nice guy. And he sort of let me run with this. When I go to the UN, the stuff I hear is it's just absolutely amazing.
You recently returned from a conference there.
Well, I came from the 30th session of the Human Rights Council. And what I'm trying to do there is get governments to support this document called the Final Draft of Guiding Principles to Eradicate Extreme Poverty. It's an absolutely wonderful, wonderful document. The United States government is not behind it. Okay? I asked the guy, it's great. I went right up to the ambassador to the Human Rights Council. And he said, well, we're not against poverty. Poverty should be stopped. But we do not see poverty as a violation of human rights. That's what he said. So I said, well, what should we do about it? He said, what we hope is that Americans will join forces, they will get together, they'll create social movements to do away with poverty, much like Martin Luther King did to give African Americans jobs. And he says we support community organizing, we support freedom of expression, but he said we just cannot say that poverty is a violation of human rights. I'm just telling you what he said. There was a side event on the right to self-determination, and I had moderated it. A friend of mine, he's one of the bigwigs in the World Muslim Conference. It was sponsored by the World Muslim Congress and the Kashmir Institute of International Relations. It was on the right to self-determination. The United Nations has a number of side events in Geneva, and occasionally you hear about them on Democracy Now! Or you just hear about them in the news. I just think these side events are phenomenal. I mean, I can tell you stories. The stuff they come up with. Just one story, French Equatorial New Guinea. The side event was an hour and a half. 1 hour and 20 minutes they spoke about what the French did to their country. And they've been trying to get after them, and they come to the UN, and the mining is ruining the place and all this other stuff. 10 minutes before it's over, a representative from France comes in and says, this is politically incorrect. He goes, I'm sorry that I am late, but I tried to get here earlier. I want to thank you for bringing up the problems in French Equatorial New Guinea, or gives it Guinea, I don't know. We will do our best to help you. So the guy goes, we traveled 9,000 miles for 10 minutes of your time, and we can't even see anyone from France in our own country?
And what was his response?
Nothing. He said, I will be more than happy to be continuing to discuss this with you. So the moderator of the panel goes, look, I think you guys should keep on talking about this over a few beers. And then time is up. Now that's why people criticize the UN. I criticize the UN, but I don't care. It's like an implied tribute. Where are you going to get this discussion? You just don't get it anywhere. So I saw they went for a few beers. I don't know. Maybe it'll help. Maybe it won't. Probably won't. But at least it's something. And that was one side event. Now we had another side event on the right to self-determination. Self-determination was going to be an article in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. People, I believe the United States was behind it, Wilson, but I'm not really sure exactly. Self-determination is basically a right that people are talking about more and more these days. What does it mean? It means, in Mohawk, the word means living nicely together and respecting each other's cultural traditions and ways of doing things. So Native Americans like this concept, and what they do is they try to use their traditional ways of doing things to met out social justice. They have tribal courts. Kids for years have just been taken out of, I lived in Alaska, in the Eskimos for a little bit. It's not politically correct to say that, Nubiat, but the kids were taken out of the homes, okay, for whatever reason, and they literally were sent to places like Phoenix. So you're living in the Arctic, all of a sudden you're in Phoenix? I mean, come on, give me a break. And the Native Americans didn't have any say in that. You know what I'm saying? So the point is, self-determination means various groups should have a certain say in how they're being treated by the domineering colonial power. They had a woman, Daniela Donjas, she did a really good presentation on the Palestinians, okay? And the Palestinians, obviously their rights are being tramped on. It was something like 30 years ago, if you looked at a map, you'd see a big part of Israel would be Palestine. Now if you look at a map, it's just little dots. So some of the stuff she brought up just it blows my mind. You have women that are waiting, they're pregnant, and they're waiting in line simply to pick up their kids at school. And they're pregnant, and it's hot, and they're there for hours, and they have a miscarriage. And it's nowhere to be heard. So these are some of the things that are denying the Palestinians. That she brought up Palestine, that was one thing she did. There's another woman spoke about the problems in Western Sahara. and maybe I shouldn't say this, but I find myself being a little bit of a, what's the word, a research voyeur. But you hear the people from the Spanish side of the Sahara and the French side, the way they complain to each other. In other words, they just go at it like cats and dogs. I'm not saying I enjoy listening to it. I'm just saying it's kind of interesting because I don't really know that much about it. What I found out in the Western Sahara, apparently there are walls in the Western Sahara that go on for 1,000 miles. Now, did you know that? Now, I'm into this stuff. I tell her, what are you, for real? She goes, yeah. She showed the pictures, and then she showed other stuff that corroborates. So I said, heck, I didn't hear about this, and I'm into this stuff. She said, I don't know, it's in Africa, Western Sahara. Who cares about Arabs? That was one example.
I'd like to hear something about your trips to Pakistan and Austria.
Yeah, sure. I went there as a Fulbrighter. Pakistan was just absolutely wonderful. The people there were just so great. It was a little scary, but the Department of State, on their behalf, because I went there as a Fulbrighter, really tried to protect me, and they had all these rules, and they drove me all over the place. And on the United States' behalf, I criticized drone policy over there, and they paid my way to be there. But, you know, Senator Fulbright said it's criticism of your country is an applied tribute. Now, let me just say briefly, when I criticized the drone policy, I did this at the United States Educational Foundation of Pakistan. I asked my audience, can you criticize your own government like we can? And they said no. So it's very refreshing. And, you know, I don't really say this that often, but sometimes I am proud that I was American. I mean, I could criticize my country. My big thing is comparing constitutions with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The Pakistani Constitution is amazing. It has numerous rights that we don't have in ours. In ours, we have nothing on health care, nothing on security and old age, nothing on shelter. There, they got it all. Not only that, it says, once the maldistribution of wealth becomes out of hand, as Muslims, even though they did say in the Constitution that they do respect other religions, but they do say it's the Islamic Republic, we must eliminate riba as soon as possible. What is riba? Riba is unjust profiteering in business dealings. And the distribution of wealth has to be closer. To make a long story short, I did some research. Do they implement that? Yes. The maldistribution of wealth in Pakistan is roughly 1/2 it is in the United States. They don't have the 1%, or the 0.1%, as Bernie Sanders says. Now, Austria is pretty advanced. It was exciting. It wasn't as romantic as Pakistan, but it was exciting. Basically, what I was talking about was the Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities. They've ratified it, and they're really trying to implement it. And the United States, as you know, we signed the document, we didn't ratify it. It's not law yet. So what did I do in Austria? Basically, I learned that they're much more advanced in terms of giving people human rights. So I went there basically very humbly saying, you know, we're not doing so great, can you help us? And that was part of it. But I was also trying to integrate human rights into their social work curriculum. So that's what else I did.
Thank you, Joe.
Well, thank you, Devon, for asking. And
very interesting.
Yeah, well, you know, I'm a professor. I've been on some
This time has come, cannot be stopped by anyone. Plant your seeds in fertile ground. There ain't nothing